Hey guys, Tom here again from synthhacker.com. Welcome back to another sound design tutorial. This one's going to be taking a look at the use of Convolution Reverb as a sound design tool. I'm really excited to bring you this tutorial today. It's been one of the most fun sound design techniques that I've been playing around with in a long time. I actually first discovered it on the Noisia Future Music series of interviews. There was three interviews with all three members of Noisia. Really cool videos. But I also did a bit of further research on my own as well. There was a really cool Sound on Sound article that I found that covered the kind of creative use of convolution reverb and actually using it more as a filter than a reverb, which is interesting. So I'll just show you the sound that we're starting with. I'm going to show you a few different examples. We're going to be covering a snare sound layered with a cymbal, a clap sound kind of layered with a water sound like splash sound, and a hi-hat convoluting a noise source with another noise source, which leads to some really interesting results. Now, when I say layer, I should kind of clarify what I mean a little bit. So essentially there are two different main reverb types. You have algorithmic and convolution. Now algorithmic is probably the most commonly used reverb type in electronic music. You've got stuff like Valhalla reverb, which is like really popular. And the way that works is it's a artificially programmed reverb that uses a delay network which is then fed back into itself to produce what we perceive as reverb. However, the way convolution reverb works is a little bit more advanced. So the way that you would kind of use that is you would record an impulse response of a room to get its sonic characteristics using either a frequency sweep, noise, or just a really short, fast decaying loud sound. What you can then do is load an impulse response into a reverb plugin and then artificially recreate that reverb. And the plugins these days are really good at doing this. So just as a quick example, I'll show you the snare sound that we've got. If I just switch the plugin off for a second, this is just a snare sound that I created from scratch for my drum bundle, which I'm thinking of doing a tutorial on in the near future as well. But yeah, I'll just show you the dry sound. So just a nice, tight, light, punchy snare. But what I did was load this convolution plugin here and load impulse responses from a variety of different sources. I found that crashes work really well, but really the possibilities are endless. You can load pretty much any impulse response you want. And as I increase the dry wet parameter here, you can hear the kind of cymbal sound start to come in, which is really cool. Now, I'll just quickly mention, this is Melda Productions Convolution Reverb. Personally, it's my favorite for this type of technique, but if you use Logic, you get Space Designer with it. If you have Max for Live Suite like me, you also have Max for Live's convolution plugin. But personally, I like this just because of the clean interface and being able to really quickly edit the impulse response in the plugin as well is really cool. But yeah, so we've got this snare sound here, and we can load different impulse responses if we want to. And you can hear, you can really quickly create really interesting, really kind of organic sounds. And it's really cool because you're essentially using the reverb as a filter. You're sending your original sound, in this case a snare, through the impulse response. And especially if that impulse response is really short, you can see we've actually shortened the decay here of the impulse response. If the impulse response is really short, it's actually acting more like a filter than a reverb, because you're essentially, the way Nick from Noisia explains it is you're kind of routing the sound through a kind of like an artificial membrane. And what's really cool about this is you can take a sound which sounds very kind of clean, dry, very electronic, put it through something like a really kind of complex sounding, harmonically complex sounding impulse response, like a real drum like we're doing here. And it adds this, it just kind of like makes an artificial sound really real and have this like really cool presence. Now, what I will say is you have to be careful with how wet you actually make the sample. This is because the kind of more wet that you put it, because you're essentially doing frequency multiplication between the two different sound sources, you can sometimes lose a lot of the presence of the original sound, and it does kind of push it back a little bit in the mix. But I'll just quickly show you what you can do to remedy that. So we have our kind of cymbal or crash snare hybrid sound here. And you can see the more wet I make the reverb, we kind of lose a little bit of the fundamental snare frequency, which is really where the punch of the snare is. So if we put that to full, you can see that's kind of attenuated a little bit, which is not ideal. But what you can do, if we just put this up to about 35%, is just load an equalizer after your convolution. I'm just using, for this example, Neutron's equalizer, but you can really do this with any EQ. And then what I've done is just boost the fundamental frequency here, just to add the punch of the snare back in. So that's without. I'll just boost this a little bit more to show you a little bit more. And you kind of get that punch back, which is really, really cool. So that's one example. And again, you can use a variety of different impulse responses, like hi-hats. This percussion is really cool because it's like a cowbell sound that I used. If I just increase the decay here so you can hear it a bit more. Really, really cool. So yeah, the possibilities here are endless. Really, you can be creative and use anything you want. I'll just show you a few other examples that I was working on. So here we just have a clap sound that I made for my future bundle. Just a really kind of simple, nice, clean clap sound. But what I did for this was actually use Melda Productions Convolution plugin to blend it with kind of like a water impulse response. So if I just bring the dry wet down to 0, that's just the clap. If we put it all the way wet, you'll hear the clap being routed through the impulse response of the water. And then what we can do is slowly dial this back until we get a really nice kind of blend between the two. Really, really cool. And then what we can do is kind of shape the tail of the sound using the volume tab here. You can also kind of like high pass the impulse response if you want, so it's only affecting kind of like certain frequencies. But yeah, we can just play around with this a little bit. Maybe high pass it a little bit more. And play around with some different impulse responses. Really, really cool. So you can really quickly just cycle through different impulse responses and just get really quick different results. And what a really cool idea that I had for using this technique, if you want to make your drum sound really organic over time, is you could even automate the kind of volume nodes in the plugin to change the timbre of the sound every single hit. One of the things that makes live recorded drum sound organic is that no one tail is the same. So you could kind of automate this, which would be really cool to kind of produce really organic results over time. These kind of samples were just found on Reddit at EDM Production, I think. I can't remember the exact post. I'll try to find it and link that down below as well. But really, again, you can just experiment with a lot of different stuff, maybe kind of layering clap sounds with shakers and stuff like that as well. Finally, I'll just show you another technique. Nick from Noisier actually talked about this briefly in his Future Music interview, but I thought I'd go over it again. So we just have Serum loaded here. using the just the noise oscillator in Serum to create a hat sound. So I'll just quickly show you this without the convolution. It's just kind of like a burst of noise. So it just sounds like a pretty simple electronically generated snare sound. We just have our noise oscillator on here with a short decaying envelope. But what's really cool is if we convolute that with another noise source. So again, I'm just using one of Serum's noise waveforms. You can find that in your documents and then just drag and drop those into your Melda production library. If you convolute that with another noise source, the kind of blend of frequencies actually creates some really interesting harmonics, and it actually makes it sound a little bit more realistic than just an electronic sounding hi-hat. So if we bring this dry down, let me just bring the volume down a tad because we're clipping. If we bring the dry wet down, we can just hear the original sound. But as we increase this, you'll start to hear one noise source convoluting with the other to create interesting harmonics, and it ends up sounding a little bit more like a realistic sound. Especially when we push it a lot, and then obviously you can shape that. Kind of make it like a little bit shorter, and then what we can do is just add another reverb after that to actually put it in a realistic sounding space. And so you end up going from this kind of really kind of harsh, you know, electronic sounding hi-hat to something that's a little bit more interesting. And obviously there's a lot you can do with that. You can play around with different noise sources and just tweak it until you get a sound that you like. So hopefully this kind of gave you a little bit of inspiration and kind of gave you a new sound design technique that you can do to make your drums sound more interesting. Again, I'd really recommend checking out Melda Productions convolution plugin. I'll link to it down below. It's definitely the kind of best value convolution plugin in my opinion that I've found, and it's also the same one that Nick from Noisia was using in his Future Music interview. And yeah, I'll link that down below. Also, guys, I've created a new Instagram and Twitter for Synth Hacker, finally actually on social media for this stuff now. So I'll link to those down below if you want to stay up to date. I'm also hopefully going to be posting some like kind of behind the scenes stuff and quick tips and stuff like that. So it's definitely worth a follow. If you haven't checked out my drum samples over on synthhacker.com yet, definitely do so. Make sure you subscribe to stay up to date with new tutorials as well. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.